Alright, here we go. Today I just want to talk about the end tractors in general, using this one here of mine as an example. You know, why you want one, kind of what they will and won't do, what to look for when you're buying one, looking at buying one, and general care and feeding when we get to it. The first thing I look at when I come up to an end tractor is I get a hold of the rear wheels. This tractor's tight. You want to go around both sides, give them a shake. You'll often find, more often than not probably, that the axles have been got loose. You can see on the inside of mine here, where I didn't paint them, they barely weep at all. It was one of the things that attracted me to this little tractor. I've never seen a drier, tighter rear end on one. The PTO output shaft, if they've had a lot of use, you'll often see them drooling quite heavily there. Transmission, the rear end all runs on the same fluid. That's easily fixed. It pulls right out of there. It's not a big deal. It's kind of a, vice grip and hammer job if you really had to. As another option, I have this override here. If it's not there, there's a cap, just threads on. This is threaded in there with some Teflon tape. If you don't want to deal with it, you can spin that cap on and solve that issue. Now the brakes, they don't work real good anyways, but I hate a tractor that's drooling all over the place, and if the brakes are saturated, well, like I say, they don't work real good anyways. If you're pulling anything down the road with it, you'd want to deal with that. Otherwise, if the drool doesn't bother you, I mean, it's not going to the high banks of Daytona. How well do they really have to work anyways? Wet stuff you're seeing on my tires, the roof leaks. January 13th, we just had a monsoon here. Crazy weather. To come to the front of the tractor, well, I'll kind of start with the steering. One of the first things I look at is how much play I have here. Now, not much on mine because I adjusted it. You go from one side to the other, the procedures. Yeah, it's easy enough done. I left that little bit of play in there. I'll come back to the steering box issues. As you can see, the ball joints reasonably tight on this. It's acceptable. These, I always want to call them kingpins. Spindle arms, notorious for wearing the bushings. I think there's a bearing in the bottom. You kind of want to take a look at that. It'd be a good idea to bring a little bottle or sizzle jack and a block and block the front end of the tractor up. And you want to keep those well greased. Down in the front center, I'll just kind of stick the phone in under there and see what it shows you. Who knows what it's showing you. There's a center pin with a bushing, the entire front axle. Bolts to a housing that you can just kind of see down in there, and everything rides on that pin. Here is said pin here, and it's, well, just to put it in scale, that's its little bushing. And when I say little, as you can see, I mean that is not a lot of material. You'll often find that that bearing's just been ground to dust and it's chewing its way into the shaft, which you could build up with some JB Weld to support a new bearing. You know, if you had to get home from Mexico. Truth of the matter is, you're probably apt to waste this pin whaling it in and out of the axle anyways. Yeah, 40 bucks worth of componentry, but you do want to look at it. Now, in relation to that steering, what I'm finding as the years come along, the engineers at Ford made no provisions to lubricate this whole steering column. There's no grease nipples, there's nothing. So 70 years later, what's the old girl chewing on in there but some wax? And I've seen a couple of them now. I have one here. They seize up. Well, maybe now is a good time to go over and look at the parts catalog really quick. Parts are, like everything else on these tractors, readily available. However, that shows reasonably well. Two different designs over the years, but basically the same thing. They're not cheap to rebuild. And if you went and got one at a wrecking yard, you're going to end up buying some of those components. Well, you're going to tear it apart when you get it home because it's on the 70-year-old wax as well. So, not wanting to run into that issue. I know I'm leaping from front to back here with what we're looking at, but it is what it is. I drilled a little hole in here, which I now have covered with tape so nothing gets in the hole. And I shot a considerable amount of heavy lubricant down in there. Doesn't matter really what you use. You could put a grease nipple on if you wanted to, but you got to get something in there for the old girl to chew on other than herself, or you're going to have troubles. And pulling this tower off, I mean, after the hood is off, all of your electronics are on the inside. It's going to be an annoying job. And then up on the bench, tear it all apart. So I'm hoping this little trick here of giving it something to chew on, some lubricant, I'd suggest you consider that. And again, this is another good reason to jack the tractor up in under here so you can flop the axle, the kingpins around, really get a good handle on the steering, and that'll let you feel whether there's grits and grinds and bumps and lumps going on as you're turning that steering box. That said, clutch wear, how much pedal have you got left? Pretty well got to drive the tractor. You can have a worn clutch that it won't take a full load. Yeah, probably somebody's dealt with that long before now. If they haven't, you have to split the tractor in half. Bigger job than your average weekend warrior wants to get into. Again, forgive my snuffling. Something I want to point out here, right here on the back of the exhaust / intake manifold. They fixed this later by putting another casting ear here and a bolt into the engine. This is a weak spot in the mounting, and they burned the gasket out in here. You can see this one's just starting to spray onto my paint, and I did repair it very quickly and hastily, knowing I wouldn't have a long-term result. So I'm making excuses for why my tractor leaks there. You don't want to let this get a whole lot worse, and you don't want to be hearing it. If it's bang a bang a bang, it's at that point eroding both the manifold and the mounting surface machined on your block. So don't let that go. It's also really loud, and you lose a lot of power, and it's not good for little baby's motor at all. If it's not running, carburetor easily, readily repaired, kit available, all of that. This tractor's still on its generator. Problem with those, they don't really make any power until they get wound up. Don't quote me, but 1200 RPM before they actually generate anything. I tend to not work these old girls too hard. This one serves for snow plowing and a wheelbarrow around the yard. Sometimes I pull some logs. I have run the 2-furrow plow and the disc and the harrow on it. That gets them snorting, sure. But for idling around, your generator's not really up to snuff, so to speak. So if it hasn't been converted to 12 volt, another problem, these new 6-volt batteries, they're hard to find. Nobody uses them, and they're surprisingly expensive. This one only lasted 4 years, and I charge it. I'll come to that in a moment. Now, why is my camera all blurry? Straighten out, baby. Come to Papa. What's this little circle thing doing there? I don't know. We're focused again. Why do I have this 12-volt battery lashed there? Well, it's because the 6 volt's done. So I just run the cables over to the starter quick. Apparently these new starters will run on 6 or 12 volts. We'll come back to the starter issue another time, or perhaps later here, because I'm having some problems with that whole issue. So anyways, I quickly charged the 6 volt. As far as all it has to do is spark the tractor. All the starter draw is coming from and to the battery, to the starter. Boom, away it goes. I can plow all day. I'm not worried about it. And I'm considering changing to an 8-volt system. Just you change the battery, and apparently this works pretty well. It's been tried and true, so we'll see what happens. Up here, for anybody in future, you know, what I'm running it on, I find all of these little end tractors and the Jubilees and the Fergusons and stuff, excuse my snuffling, they all start in a different happy spot. Find it, mark it. Then if you're hopping from one tractor to the other, you're not getting confused, and you can just send anybody or their kid over to start it. Put it to start, turn the key, hit the button, away you go. Now, here's a thing I learned the really hard way. Oh, where's my... Here, I was going to have a sip of beer. Anyways, these old motors, you'll find the crankcase. Here I have one off of a Ferguson motor, just loaded with gunk. And I mean some serious gunk. That's some of the remnants of what I drained. Yeah, might not even be out of this one, I don't know. It was, the gunk also just gets caked on these cylinder walls. You go over to the other side, well, the other side on the Ford flathead, top of the motor, this thing has overhead valves. Oh, I've got the head all off. Yeah, got everything there. Anyways, just full of muck. They didn't have detergent oils. And who knows who's put in what and how long these things have sat. Point is, cost me a motor in this tractor. Oil looked good, oil came out clean, didn't realize there's, like, no kidding, 3 inches of sludge in there. So this tractor's original motor just literally chewed itself to death. Every place the oil went was carrying that abrasive. The thing looked like it had been running on, you know, a sandblasting medium. And realize these tractors, as much as they have a filter, it's a bypass filter. The oil goes right from your mains, or from your crankcase, excuse me, into your mains, up through your cam. The little line goes to your oil pressure, and that line is what runs down into here through your canister. So effectively, it's not being filtered. So my advisement, and I learned this the hard way, take that crankcase off of there. You don't have to brake the tractor or support it. Yes, it's an evil, ugly, dirty job, but do it, because otherwise, baby is running on sand. And I wouldn't just put it to these Fords and Fergusons, I'd put it to any tractor. Oh, you know, until you get into the 70s at least, where you got some decent oil and filtration systems and hopefully a little better maintenance, and it's just not as old. But that is something I will never do again, is not to take that crankcase off and clean it. It also allows you, I know I'm skipping back and forth and everything, I'm trying to talk about end tractors, but it allows you to get in here. See, I've got the one connecting rod off so I can see what that main looks like. I can see what the corresponding bearing looks like. I can get up in there. The light isn't adequate here. I hadn't set it up, but I can handle the bottom end, the top end. I can see up into the cylinders. I can check to see how much end play there is on the crank. I can measure. I can have a pretty good evaluation of what my motor's looking like. And again, it doesn't have to be on the bench like this. It can stay in the tractor. So, what will and they won't do happily, well, I've got this set up for snow plowing. They do that brilliantly. Would be far better to have the system on the front end, which they make them with cables. Comes back and your lift arm runs the front end. That'd be nice. You're not turning around and you have a selection of speeds as well. Your forward gears. Blowers, snow blowers, ooh, I've seen them on there, but I'm dubious. I mean, any snow blower I've looked at in a you know, equipment dealer catalog. They have 40 horse they want, and these old girls are just not in that league. Now, putting a blower on the front with its own power unit, whoo-hoo, you could clear the railroad tracks. I'd be all for that. Well, you may have noticed I put an inline filter in. I like that. I can see what I'm doing. You might notice this tractor has one oil leak. That's from the governor. And they always seem to leak from the governor. They have a little vent hole in there. I mean, it can't be a vacuum, but the odd little leak you got to live with. You can see down in here, what's that big thing schmooged on the side of the motor, he says. What is that? Well, when I changed this motor from the one I wore out, I was in a real hurry. I needed the tractor fast. I dropped the crankcase, of course, but I didn't have a gasket. So I glued it back together. Had a big leak there, so that's a big schmoz geometry of silicone snotted on there just to slow down the leak. Oh, this tractor, I painted it with no consideration to proper colors. This is a working tractor. I just used whatever I had around. Excuse me, sniffling again. A lot of people say to me, Scott, you clean that tractor up so quick. Looks beautiful. How'd you do it? Power wash the guts out of it about 6 times. Just keep power washing until you've got every crack and crevice clean. And then you can really see what leaks and how bad it leaks and whether you need to address that or not. And then when I paint them, I just use enamel paint, rust paint, whatever, it's lying around. Thin it down like stain. And after I go back to the power wash it about 6 times till you've got every nook and cranny. Then give it a quick degreasing so it'll take the paint happily. And then I just thin the paint down again like it's stain and put it on, maybe 3-4 times. Just swab it around. Let that truck go by. If anyone wanted to restore this tractor, I haven't painted it so deep you need to chisel it off. I can still, you know, get a wrench on my bolts. I hate finding a tractor like this and somebody's got the spray gun to it and it's got like makeup on like Tammy Faye. I mean, you don't know what's leaking in under there. These tractors are known for, I'll go around the other side, they'll crack the outside of their block. And you'll see a big patch, often right in there above the starter motor behind the frost plug. Now surprisingly, that's really not a big deal because the crack is on the outside. So it just drools a bit of antifreeze. What happened there is the guy had the thing screaming hot and shut it off instead of leaving it sit there to idle for 5 or 10 minutes and collect itself again. They shut it off and you just hear, oh, you got to be mechanically deaf not to like what the poor motor sounds like at that point. And what else was I going to say about these things? That was about it. I like to keep the brakes tight on them. I haven't got a lot of movement there for the tractor ballet or break dancing, perhaps, if you prefer, but we'll come back to that. Water pumps go on them, generators. The governors are pretty self-sufficient. The carburetors, once they're cleaned, they're good to go. I usually lose this air intake system over to the filter, and I just put a simple little K&N style filter on there with a little foamy oversock oiled up. They run great on it. Then I don't have to clean up this big ugly contraption. And I also end up with a mounting point. I can put a little stash box in there. Always astounds me that these tractors, I mean, this thing isn't really missing anything. It doesn't have all the lights and factory options, but where was the guy supposed to carry his sandwich in his jug of water? I don't know what their thinking was. They built this beautiful hood. You know, at the time, that was, you know, ooh, almost futuristic, right? Thing looked great sitting in the showroom. And they gave you a little tiny toolbox with the 6 wrenches and 2 screwdrivers that you need to take these things all to pieces. Most of it's 11/16, by the way. So, was there anything else I was going to talk about with these tractors? Oh, the oil. Oh, that's a whole subject, oil. I think I'm going to leave that for another day because I can talk about that for a long time. There's a lot of things to know about oil. These things don't want to run on the old sludge, that's for sure. The oil in the rear end, dipstick there to check it. 80/90 weight, Hypoid gear oil. Yeah, most people are changing it, going, problem with the 80/90, it's hydroscopic. It picks up oil, water. I've seen people on the YouTube, they think it leaks in here on the fill on your shifter. Well, it doesn't. It's just, I mean, this isn't a vacuum in there. Air comes and goes. Excuse me, cold, wet air gets in there. The water condensates into the 80/90 weight. It kind of turns milky and yucky. Then it runs down to the bottom where your pump is. See his little outie orifice there? That's your pump way down in the bottom. The water will collect there and potentially even crack or break your pump, or the tractor just won't move. It's frozen. So 80/90 weight, lose it, dump it, put in the new, I can never remember, is it AWS? They got 60 and 32 weight. I'm not sure which one's thicker. You want the thicker one, the 60, well, I'd say 60 weight. Whatever, quite common. I'm not the only one doing this. They run fine on it. They love it. In the cold mornings, the 80/90 weight, oh, takes forever to warm that stuff up. Your your pump won't lift the plow. Pump's laboring. Oh. The AWS fluids solve that problem. They're not hydroscopic. They're lighter, and they're plenty heavy enough to support the bearing gear interface loads. You know, your transmission, your differential, all of that. Very few of you are going to be plowing all day long, pulling a 2-furrow plow. At that point, I might think the weight's a little light, perhaps. I'd do it anyways, but you're probably not going to do that. You're probably not going to put any kind of a load on it for extended, full-on, full-tilt gonzo working. And the 80/90 weight really stinks. Whew, hate dealing with that stuff. Stay with the new stuff, and I haven't had any problems with it. I've run it in several tractors for the years now. Tires, of course, when you're looking at the tractor, big expense. The rears, not easy to deal with either. These puppies, if they're loaded, they push about 1,000 pounds. And you forget what they weigh dry. You probably almost find them always loaded with fluid, water and calcium. Why? Excuse my snuffling again. Why? Because the theory was to put more tractional force plowing at the contact point on the ground, pulling furrow plows. You're probably not doing that with the tractor. The added mass, you can be adding, what is it now? Depends on the size of the tires. These tires vary from 10.2s all the way up to 13.6s you can put on them. It's a substantial difference in volume. So, but anyways, you're adding at least a few hundred pounds, maybe approaching 800 or 900 on each side if you load them. And they have to be calcium or something that doesn't freeze. I'm not going to get into the options there. I don't think it's necessary on these tractors. And although this one came loaded, if I ever put new tires on anything, I won't load them. And in fact, the Ferguson will spin around and show you this poor TO20 I have in a million pieces. What was my point? Oh, Ferguson's manual. He actually suggests not loading them. Just because we're here, there's a set of 13.6s. I guess it's not much of a comparison to the 12.4s at this distance. That's the Park tractor, who donated its motor to this tractor and also the front end, because this tractor, one of the things that threw me was, as much as having the best best rear end I've ever seen. It had the worst front end I've ever seen. They had rebar pounded down in here on the front arms, welded, and believe it or not, these cast iron axles, I mean, they're Mongo, man. One of them was bent by 2.5 inches. How do you bend a piece of cast that's like that? There's a bit of a scale thing with my hand. How do you bend that? Was it in a barn fire and put on this tractor? I don't know. I've got the front end there, but the light, the way it is, I'm not going to dig it out and show it to you. My friends and everybody who came in was astounded when I pointed out, hey, have a look at the front of that tractor. Holy smokes, how did it get like that? Well, we don't know. The guy I got it from said the guy he got it from said the guy he got it from said the guy before him said somebody had a loader on it at one point in time. I can't see any evidence of a loader being on this tractor, but it did have the worst front end I've ever seen. Somebody's welded those wheel rims. So, but again, I gotta figure that that initial bent and hammered front end was from a different tractor. That's not really relevant to you as you're buying one. That issue in there can be a bit of a problem for you. Clutch, you want to make sure it's good. We've already talked about the rear end. You can check the charging. You can listen to the water pump. Well, that's about it when you're looking at buying one. That's pretty much what I wanted to run through. And I see I'm headed for 30 minutes here, so I think I'll just wrap this up. The exhaust, oh, they're cheap. They're 160 bucks or something. Get one. These things can be whisper quiet, and why shouldn't they be? Yeah, back to why do you want one in the first place? Well, because they're adorable. They're elegant in their simplicity, and they're cheap. They'll do everything just about that a four-wheel drive subcompact will do for a fraction of the price. You can still put all the options on them. They're not a great loader tractor. You can put a loader on it. You can put anything you want on the rear end. And those little, the same size of modern compact or subcompact I'm talking about, they won't run a big snowblower either. You know, they might, well, the compacts, the bigger ones will, but the smaller ones, if they put a blower on the thing, it's 2 feet wide. So, and this thing will drag most of them kicking and screaming around the yard anyways. You can put it up against the house and climb off it. It'll just dig a hole. I think I could, you know, with a nice fresh motor and one of these in the kind of condition this tractor's in, yeah, put some new tires on it. And then go out and buy 6 implements that you would have on your Kubota or your John Deere or whatever on your 10-acre hobby farm. I'll have less money in my whole outfit than what you have in your, just the tractor alone, not including the options. So I think that's about it for end tractors, and I think a lot of the stuff I talked about, what you look for, and the care and feeding, let's say, with oil and whatnot, not letting it leak, blah, blah, blah. That'll go through any tractor of any make, model, and size, you know, barring today's gigantic field tractors that have, you know, little in common in any sense with what we're talking about here with the end tractors and comparative sizes and eras. Hello, Wilma. Wilma's pregnant. So I think that about wraps up everything I wanted to talk about looking at a few details for another video where I talk about the oil and why that's so important. Oh, and in an earlier video, or it might be later, I'm not sure because I'm just filming as I go. These stay arms, I've since discovered you can get those at TSC. They're about $50 a piece, which is not out of line at all, I don't think, because the full kit that you can buy, which doesn't allow the adjustment, it's over $100. So that's the way to go as far as I'm concerned. So, thanks for listening. Again, we'll come back to oil, and I'll explain this poor fellow, who has a C steering box, by the way. Joseph in his coat of many colors, we used to call him. Bit of a story there, and again, there's that other horrified front end, although you can't see anything in perspective here. So, I think that's it for today. We'll just call it a day, and I don't think there's anything else I meant to ramble on about, so thanks. Talk to you soon.